Welcome to another episode of Talking with Tech Leaders. Today, I'm joined by Professor Bill Buchanan OBE. Professor Buchanan is a Scottish computer scientist who leads the Centre for Cybersecurity and Cryptography at Edinburgh Napier University. He was appointed an officer of the Order of the British Empire, OBE, for services to cybersecurity. His social media tagline reflects his strong belief in changing the world for the better. A serial innovator, an old world breaker, a new world creator. Bill currently leads the BlockPass ID Lab and the Centre for Cybersecurity and Cryptography. He works in the areas of blockchain, cryptography, trust and digital identity, and has one of the most extensive cryptography sites in the world, asecuritysite.com. He has published over 30 academic books and over 350 research papers. Along with this, Bill's work has led to many areas of impact, including 3 highly successful spin-out companies, received an outstanding contribution to Knowledge Exchange Award, and was included in the Future Scot Top 50 Scottish tech people who are changing the world. What a pleasure it is to welcome Professor Bill Buchanan, OBE. Feeling very privileged today. It's my pleasure to welcome Professor Bill Buchanan, OBE, on Talking with Tech Leaders. How are you keeping? You well?
Very good, yeah. Thanks for the invite.
And what a pleasure it is to have you with us. So thanks very much for taking the time to do it, Bill.
Good, thank you.
So obviously in part 1, we kind of talk through career today, choices you've made, and kind of dive into kind of some detail around where it all began for you. So do you kind of want to kick us off and kind of tell us where it all began?
Right. Well, I suppose there's in Scotland we often talk about our fathers and what they did, and my father and my grandfather were both electricians. I come from a town in between Glasgow and Edinburgh that really everybody should visit. It's called Falkirk. We define people from Falkirk as being a Falkirk Baron.
Uh-huh.
And they were both electricians, and I remember my dad teaching me how to wire plugs, and I can remember putting the wires around before they had the little plastic bit on the plugs, the electrical plugs. Mm-hmm. But I don't know, I was forever, please don't do this too, I was forever sticking my fingers in light sockets and giving myself an electrical shock. I would take out the back off things. I remember my mum saying, "That's another radio that you've broken." And I just had that inquiring mind of opening things and looking inside. I wasn't probably that great at putting them all back together again. But it was just that fascination of learning things, that power of electricity that we're all dependent upon now and it's so fundamental, I think, as a child. And I think we too often lose that amazingness of the world. Why is the sky blue? That type of question. And it's amazing when you hear children talking and asking these questions. And I hate to see them being dismissed by the parents, "Oh, that's just a silly question," and so on. So I think as an innovator, I've never really lost that inquiring, thinking about things, thinking about the very simple things. People like Steve Jobs was obviously very good looking at that detail and understanding how you can make things better, asking fundamental questions. Can you make a phone that integrates everything into it? And everybody said, "No, that's not possible." So my father and my grandfather, and probably if electrical engineering had existed before them, they would have probably did electrical engineering. So I moved into electrical engineering as an electrician. That was the natural thing at that time. Higher education and so on wasn't really a thing that happened where I was brought up. So it seemed an amazing thing to do. That was a natural thing me to follow what my father had actually done. So I ended up working in a chemical factory in Grangemouth, a place near Falkirk, and it was actually a dye works, and you can imagine people walked around being different colours of dye. Green or purple or something like that identified where you were actually working. And one thing I really noticed was that a lot of the tradesmen that I was speaking to and so on had some regrets. I wish I had done this when I had done this. And you'd end up with long chats with these tradesmen as an apprentice. And it kind of dawned on me that I needed to look at education and understanding new things and not be trapped in an area, have to control. So the best thing you can do in your life is to have control of your own destiny. And I felt at that time, I mean, I was still a teenager and it probably wasn't at the forefront in my head, but I just wanted to not be trapped as some of those people were with what they were doing, and I wanted much more control about my destiny. So I saw this amazing little three-legged thing, and it was a transistor that very few people understood at the time. And I remember going to college and these people explaining the amazingness of what's called an NPN or a PNP junction, explaining the physics of it. And few people understood it, but it was actually starting to build real systems. This was the start of the computer generation. And I remember going into the electrical plant and going to these new clean areas that had computers in them. And you had this industrial plant, and then you had these electronic devices, and you had these people going about with white coats, technicians, with kind of computer programs and things like that. And the amazingness of these new devices and the control systems that were involved, I could see was the future. And I was an electrician and I loved electrical engineering and what was done there, but I could see there was more things evolving around the electronics and control systems and so on. So I knew that the future was going to be around this little magical device that's now embedded. Ask any kids about what's in their iPad, what's the thing that runs it, and I bet you very few understand that there are billions of these little transistors in there all working together to make the magic that really happens. So I decided to move into education and took an honours degree in communication engineering and electronics. And I think that fostered my real interest in radio waves. And when you think about it, these magical waves that exist do so much. They can locate me within less than a meter from a tiny microscopic signal that's sent from a satellite. We have Wi-Fi. I'm connecting to you just now through Wi-Fi signals running at nearly a gigabit per second. So I think that invisibleness and the understanding of it, these complex systems, was something that I've never lost. And I love the mathematics around radio waves and so on, but it's the practical nature. And I think I've always loved the hybrid of practice against theory. You can learn something by practice, and that's great. You can learn the theory, but it becomes magical. And I think as a teacher, it becomes magical when your students actually see that you don't just know the theory, but you actually know the practice. Because the two things together is really where you want to be as a teacher.
You can kind of tell, Bill, that you've obviously still got a really big passion for what you've done in teaching. And obviously that's so important when you're kind of teaching the next generation, the kind of new wave. And I remember having these moments in school, the eureka moments when it finally clicks and you understand something. Is that quite a big thing for you when you're explaining to the students a certain thing and you can just see it go in their head, come together?
Yeah, without a doubt. Yeah, when I look back on the people who inspired me, you could name the teachers that have taught me, the people who stood up in front and really almost bared their whole soul, their passion, their love. I think once you lose your love of your topic, you've lost it as a teacher, and you'd be as well just reciting something. So I've always had a passion for what I teach. I always have a belief for it. I don't want to stand up in front of students and not know as much as I can about the topic. And if I do feel that I'm weak in any area, I'll just go and push myself to do the research to it. And I think that comes across in students. If they understand that you are an expert in the area and you're not just reading from a book the night before and so on. And I think too often in education now we are thin and long. We teach lots of subjects, but we don't really teach them in depth anymore. And that really worries me, a kind of Wikipedia type world where we just go to Wikipedia. Wikipedia says this and Wikipedia says that. That becomes a world where we are very surface learners and nobody's an expert anymore. So I actually quite like to go deep and learn everything about a topic, and then I can move on to another one, but without really understanding the core. And I love to learn the mathematics behind these complex research papers and to articulate it to the general public. The best recognition that any teacher can have is to be able to explain to a child what public key encryption is or something like that. And I think too often we bury ourselves down into explanations that are too difficult for many people.
I mean, I tried to read some of the things you've published, not in great detail, but it is when you're kind of looking at it, I suppose from my view. I mean, I'm techie to an extent. There's always a keen interest in technology, but you are, inch wide, mile deep, kind of right into the core of things. It's really interesting to see.
Well, I was teaching analog electronics. I knew when I was doing analog electronics, the future was digital electronics. When I was doing digital electronics, I knew the future was microprocessors. When I was doing microprocessors, I could see that the future was data communications and then networks and so on. So when you're in technology and when you're a teacher, your notes last about 1 year and then something new comes along. And I could see all these new jobs happening, especially in networking. Cisco created the router, and that changed everything. IP, TCP came along, Ethernet, and I've always made sure that when I'm lecturing and doing research, I try to keep up to the minute. So I always added new things. I learned how to write, not at school, I must say, but as I was creating notes. We used to create notes at one time when we're teaching. So I did learn that writing, and then I was teaching, say, C programming, and I found it quite boring. So I took electronics and I took C programming, and I taught electronics through C programming. And that worked because I was teaching electronic engineers how to program, but I was actually teaching them how to do electronics. So I've always found that if you can find a topic and you're teaching several things at the same time, it makes the learning, rather than teaching C programming over here and electronics over here, I'm a great believer of bringing them together and solving problems. So I moved quickly and I moved into the areas, and then I did my PhD. Fundamentally in academia, you need to get your PhD, you need to publish papers, you need to STEAM that's equivalent to other universities. So the PhD was very important, and it was probably one of the best things that I ever did in my whole career, because without that I would probably have a little gremlin on my shoulder saying you didn't do your PhD or you could have done amazing things. So I did that, and I made sure that I think when you're younger, you always feel that someone has something better, or if I had done this, if I had went to public school or something, I would have been this and so or that. And at that age, you've always got that. So at least I struck that one off. That I had that. It's an apprenticeship for research, so it's not an end qualification, as many people think. It's a qualification that says I can now hopefully do research properly. I've done my apprenticeship, just like I'd been an apprentice electrician. I've now done my apprenticeship for research, and I'm ready to supervise students and to publish papers and so on. So I did that. I became what was called a reader at that time. I didn't understand what the term meant, whether I was meant to read all the time. But I very quickly moved to become a professor, and that's just such a wonderful, an amazing title.
How did it feel?
Oh, I mean, that's as far as a little boy in Falkirk, wrapping wires around a plug socket and so on. For that person to achieve a professor in a university is like there's nothing better.
Yeah.
So the great thing about being a teacher is that you have the opportunity to teach people, for them to engage with you, to have some belief in what you do, to be enthused by your teaching, and then for them to fly. My university is really excellent, and allowing people with a wide range of backgrounds to achieve their full potential through there. So for the spin-outs, I met some people, Jamie Graves with Zone Fox, who you could see were so talented, but they just needed that little support.
Did you kind of try and then reinforce, so if these guys are coming in, first off, you're seeing them going from student to, running kind of spin-offs at the university. Did you also try and reinforce to them when they had those kind of naysayers or the doubters and this won't work, it won't happen? Would you kind of reassure them and kind of try and say, look, this is a strong idea, there is a gap here, I think you're onto something, and try and kind of promote that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the key thing was that it was always learning. So the biggest mistake you make in these things is, here's my idea, it's the blockchain, this and that, and so on, and you keep hammering it, and people say, I don't really see where it is. I've always been very good at the elevator pitch, and through working around that, you start with a problem. What is the problem that you're trying to solve here? What's it going to look like? How much is it going to cost? And who's going to use it? 4 slides. It's not a 50-slide PowerPoint deck explaining the mathematics behind it. Because coming from a university, everybody assumes that we're doing great science and research, and we have the maths, and we've done the state of the art and so on. But the real skill has always been to get the problem, understand it, and know what's already out there and how you will fit that gap. It's a very simple thing, but many people don't get it. They just keep forcing their technology on it.
Yeah. Oh, good. Smashing. And you've also mentioned there as well, Bill, you've kind of created, there's been some kind of cloud-based education platforms as well that have come out of that.
Yeah. Well, software development is my core, really. It's where my wife will paint and draw. I code. I can understand what looks good and art and so on, but I know my strengths are in mathematics and abstraction and coding, and I've always seen coding as a natural thing to do. It's a creative thing for me. And really, I've always got a reason for it. And the reason I created a security site was like a scratch pad of ideas that I could actually try out and show code and so on, mainly to show my students, here is it working, here's an example, I can teach with it, I learned something, and then I write it down, just like I used to write books. I wrote books all the time, so I could do that. Books are static. Web and web systems are dynamic. I can update and change I have much more control over it.
Yeah.
So the site I created, and I moved from a Windows program to the cloud. It might not seem a big jump, but I pushed myself to develop through the web because I could see that having Windows applications wasn't the future.
Mm-hmm.
I got a unique, once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to work with Bright Red Publishing, a little company in Edinburgh. And in Scotland, they were changing the whole framework and all of the subjects into this new framework. Bright Red Publishing had a whole lot of books, and now they had to republish all their books again with the new curriculum. And they approached us to be able to develop a new web cloud-based platform to support it. So to me, it's not that interesting to basically take the material in the book and just put it on the website. That's just a PDF.
Mm-hmm.
So it gave me the opportunity to actually look at immersive learning environments.
Mm-hmm.
So things like quadratic equations, that you can actually do the examples in the book, but you make sure that you're doing the additional things. Like if the pupil doesn't have a tutor or their parents don't know maths, where are they going to get the help once they go home?
Mm-hmm.
So the system we created allowed them to put in examples for quadratic equations and solve for the answer, such as showing all the working out and so on.
Mm-hmm.
So for maths, and we did it with German, Spanish.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we really innovated by bringing in a lot of cloud-based systems and online systems to make sure it wasn't just a book online.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's been used by millions of pupils. We have tests, MCQs that they can take again and again. And there is no barrier. It costs zero.
That's amazing.
My belief has always been that education should be free to access.
Mm-hmm.
Bright Red Publishing, obviously, they're expert in their books. So hopefully it enhances their books by having the links there. But it now covers virtually every topic. And when you think this was pre-pandemic, so this was when people just didn't think there was any need for online material.
Mm-hmm.
It just has to be PDFs and so on. So that site ran through the pandemic and so on, and allowed teachers and parents to have that type of resource. I'd moved to YouTube a long time ago, probably about 10 years ago. I started to make little snippets of things. And again, I could see the future was away from the written word. And we can see that happening now. I've just evolved and probably not thinking about it, just pushed. I remember R.E.M., their best album that they ever did, I think it was Automatic for the People. It was the album they did, and they all changed their instruments. Their albums had struggled up to that point, but for this album, each musician changed their instruments and they swapped them around, and it was the most successful they had because they had pushed themselves to learn new things and to be more creative. So I think very quickly you learn that something isn't working for your students, but other things, like I do doodles now. I'm a talking chalk and blackboard teacher that just happens to teach around PowerPoint. I'd love a blackboard with a chalk. So I tried out doing some doodles for students. So I tried it out. It's a very low-tech approach with a camera and some Sharpies and a bit A2 or A3 paper. And I just talk, and without me being on the camera. And I was amazed when I speak to students just in the last few weeks. They go, yeah, I really like the doodles. When I was studying, I watched the doodles, and they go, oh yeah, you didn't watch the classroom? No, I watch the doodles. I like to watch the doodles when I'm on the train.
On that, just so people that are listening can see, you've got over 1,000 videos on YouTube, and I watched some of the doodles last night. Very calming. You're kind of talking through what you're doing, the solution, and then kind of getting them through it. And as you're doing it, they're kind of following you, putting that kind of plan out on paper, and not something you have to do in your job. This is something additional that you're kind of adding in there.
Yeah. I've always thought that we have things like workload allocation definitions. To do this task will take this amount of work, and it takes 5 hours per week to do that. And then, so I've never really subscribed to that. So you should do your job to the best that you can, and students come first and their education. So if it takes you a weekend to create a doodle and enhances their learning, then that's worthwhile. It's your own commitment in time. But I think if you do the 9 to 5 to things, so it's a difficult. I don't recommend to anybody to do extra work, by the way. But I think when you're loving what you do and you see benefit, because you do one doodle, and I think that's what's always been, is that rather than me, if I did this because there was maybe 15% of the class that didn't turn up to classroom lectures, and they're going to come back to you just before the test and say, well, how do you do that, and what was that method, and so on. So I think the reason I put the lectures online initially was that at least everybody could see what it was. And it's only the pandemic that has actually changed that whole perception.
Yeah.
But it was through the pandemic that you actually see you can actually enhance it. And I think we learned probably as much in the pandemic about teaching, how to engage students, so that if they weren't there, still interest them to turn up to a live lecture rather than watching the recording. Because that's the end goal, is that you just end up recording and you become, it all becomes remote and there's no link to the tutor at all. You're just hearing somebody that you've never met before. So you need to find new ways to say, why don't you all turn up either to the class or to the online lecture, and it'll be fun and interesting and you'll learn something. Otherwise, it becomes a soulless environment.
That's a challenge as well, I think, with companies as well, now and all the remote working, the culture and the vision and values and the mission. And I'm sure universities feel that as well, as, keeping the kind of heart and the soul of the institution together. So no, really good kind of thoughts around that. But that's part one, Bill. Thank you so much for kind of running through, your career history, career to date, walking through some of the choices you've made. Move on to part two, as around knowledge and experience. And there is some basic questions in here, obviously, but kind of the first question I've got for you, Bill, is what is cryptography?
Cryptography. Well, we've been doing ciphers for centuries. As long as humankind has existed, we've passed secret messages to each other. We used to call them ciphers with a Y, which I don't spell like that. I spell it with an I. But in Love and War, Mary Queen of Scots, Caesar have passed secret messages, and it's always been something that's intrigued us. And you can see with the troubles that we have in the world just now that keeping things secret, discovering things is so fundamentally important. So cryptography is all about really the science of keeping things secret, but it's now extended to trust, digital trust, to make the mathematical ground truth. Underneath, there isn't just smoke and mirrors, but there is mathematics. So to me, the future of the internet is to build on a foundation of mathematics. We've built the internet on sand. Now we need to look towards building maths. On top of that, there's a layer of software, and then you can build governance and trust. It's really rebuilding our society in a digital foundation and allow us still to do the things that we've done, but in a more trustworthy way, because we understand human trust, but very few people understand digital trust. In the areas I look at, sorry for being technical, it's symmetric key encryption. If you want some acronyms, I'll throw some acronyms at you. AES and CHA-20 are two of the ones that we often use. It's CHA-20 and AES that's actually securing the connection that we have just now. and virtually every connection that you have to the internet, you can thank the AES symmetric key encryption algorithm for being really fast and really secure. We talk about Bob and Alice in cybersecurity. It's our role as a white hat to make sure that they can talk to each other, and Eve, the adversary, or Mallory, doesn't get involved in that conversation. Of course, in cybersecurity, we could be black hats in that we could be Eve, we could be the attacker and listening to communications. But most of the time in cybersecurity, we're trying to protect Alice and Bob and Alice to make sure that they can communicate, they can prove each other's identity, and so on. So we have hashing methods. That's how your password gets scrambled up. These little hashing methods allow you to take our world and then make it into something that the computer would recognize. And then there's the amazingness of public key encryption. I don't know if anybody really understands how that's going to change our world, but it will. And it's been around since about 1977. And it's really now that the potential of public key encryption is happening, where we can now have a digital wallet at the core of cryptocurrency and authentication, identity, and so on. Underneath it's public key encryption that's under there. And then there's key exchange. Bob needs to get a way to send the encryption key to Alice, even though Eve is listening. So we have a method called key exchange that allows them to talk openly and exchange their secret that they're going to use for the encryption that they have. And I was very lucky to talk to Marty Hellman just a couple of weeks ago. And the amazingness is that I said to him, can you come and talk to our students? Yes. It's a lovely thought that this is almost like a Nobel Prize. He got the Nobel Prize equivalent for computer science. And he was coming along to speak to our MSc students, which I think is just a fantastic thought, that there are amazing people who live on a different planet, really, who could speak to every world leader, but they want to come and talk to our students. And they see more benefit in that than talking to the president of the US or something like that.
That's amazing.
But Marty Hellman, he created the key exchange method, now called the Diffie-Hellman method. When I saw the Diffie-Hellman method, I was totally hooked on cryptography. And I think that amazingness when I see my students saying, yeah, I got it. I did this and this, and I got that. That is fantastic. I think that's the wonderment that I kind of felt when I understood Ohm's law or radio waves and so on. So then we've got other things like tunneling, encryption tunnels that we create now to make security. And then there's the horribleness of what's called the PKI, or public key infrastructure, that very few people understand, and that's how to use digital certificates. And it's amazing, even people in cybersecurity, well experienced, still struggle with digital certificates and how that whole trust infrastructure works on the internet. So I think it's the great thing is to be able to teach this to students and to give a full picture. So it's not like you're teaching a book and you're missing out chapters 4, 5, and 9. I think I have the opportunity to tell the story of how all those different elements that I've talked about fit together. And it's that feeling of that last part of the jigsaw that I love. So to me, education is like that. If I can get the last part of the jigsaw. So I think it's all those bits coming together that I like to tell the story. But the great thing with cryptography is that it's an evolving art. We have zero-knowledge proofs coming along, post-quantum crypto, blockchain, homomorphic encryption. You name it, there is a landscape.
Oh, completely. You mentioned kind of post-quantum crypto. And obviously, there is computer programs out there that can try and break passwords and decipher ciphers and things like that. And as quantum computing maybe becomes a reality at one point, does that then mean bad news for cryptography or for these kind of security protocols or security things we've got in place just now because of the actual power or the magnitude of power that quantum computing can bring to crack them? Does it cause a problem, or is it a good thing?
No, in most areas everything is fine. So in symmetric key encryption, in hashing, virtually all of the encryption that we have is safe against it. It's the way that quantum computers work that they crack the existing public key methods of RSA and elliptic curve and discrete logs. So those are the three things that are under risk from quantum computers. Everything is fine, which is a bit worrying because blockchain, Bitcoin is based on elliptic curve cryptography, and it's great because we've picked it and it's been so efficient. It's Satoshi Nakamoto selected elliptic curve, and it's worked for signatures ever since. But quantum computers, because of the way that the light wave propagates, can actually solve RSA, which is based on the factorization of 2' numbers into 2' numbers. Elliptic curve is also a method that can be cracked. So the only thing that's at risk really is public key encryption methods. So we need to migrate away from RSA and elliptic curve and LGAML, discrete logs, towards these new post-quantum ones. And cryptography has always moved. It's always been dynamic. It's always migrated from one protocol, which is weak, to another one.
Yeah.
So over the next 10 years, you'll see much more of these lattice methods as we define now. Lattice is a well-known hard problem in computing. RSA and elliptic curve are the methods they use are not well-known hard problems. They just happen to be hard problems with the processors that we have just now.
Right.
But with quantum computers, they will be broken. So I think that's the amazingness, is that I couldn't influence the start of the internet because I was an apprentice electrician. But now I have the opportunity to influence the way that things actually go. So every paper, every research grant, every spin out has the opportunity to, and we focus on citizen identity and citizen systems. Maybe we can push the science towards building things that respect citizens and their privacy and so on. So I think it's all there. The toolkit is almost complete. We now need to build it properly.
Oh, good. Awesome. Thanks for kind of going through that. A lot of it went over my head, but I was trying to keep hold of it. No, it was good. It was really good. The next question I've got for you then is, again, fairly open. Why is cybersecurity so important?
It's so important because really we need to, when you think about it, we're protecting, my university has to protect its staff, It has to protect its students, it has to protect its citizens, it has to protect its data and so on. We have to protect our data. We have to protect ourselves from abuse, and companies need to do that. So we've got to look at securing networks, their operating systems, devices, and make sure that the whole thing works. It's like a hi-fi system. Your hi-fi is as good as the worst component. So if you have a cheap component in your hi-fi, then it's going to bring the whole thing down. You can have the best cables and gold connectors and the best amp if your speakers are not very good. So the weakest link in the chain, and it's normally us, the human element to it. So you can have the best digital cryptography and mathematics, as long as there's people giving away their passwords and clicking on phishing emails, then we're struggling. I think the interesting thing is the term cybersecurity. A lot of people don't like that term.
Right.
It's a catch-all term. It used to be called information security and areas like that. NIST define with their NICE framework that cybersecurity involves 33 specialist areas, 52 different job roles,
Wow,
1,000 tasks, or hundreds and hundreds of skills and knowledge areas, and many, many abilities. So as a term, it's not a great term. As in electrical engineering, you did electrical engineering. For electronics, you did analog or digital electronics and so on. But cybersecurity came along, and now we have these many different roles. And the thing is that it should be embedded into everybody's role. As a software developer, as a cloud architect, as a business administrator, you should be cyber aware, and cybersecurity should be a core part. Unfortunately, we make it an end part. We build our systems and then we say, right, now we're going to make it secure. Much more we need to make it secure by design. So when we're designing our systems, just like we design a bridge and we do all the maths to make sure it's not going to fall down, last thing we want to do is build the bridge and say, right, okay, will it fall down? Well, we better test it. Can you test it? Can you just drive across that bridge and go? So we need to be much more savvy about building systems which are secure by design.
No, good. Fantastic. The next question I've got for you, Bill, here is, what are the biggest cybersecurity threats right now?
So you might say that the end part is ransomware and data exploitation, and the starting part is the dropping of something onto the system. So there are phases that you go through, and Lockheed Martin defined the kill chain model: reconnaissance, weaponization, delivery, exploitation, installation, command and control, and then action on the objectives. And the actual dropping of the thing onto your system is a very small window. So if you don't detect that, then you're in trouble. So it might just be a spear phishing email, drop a backdoor onto the machine, a RAT, remote access Trojan, onto the machine, gets them in over the firewall. There's no more firewall anymore. They're in your network from there. So the threats really is the motivations. So the motivations is obviously stealing data and making money from it, from ransom, tricking people into revealing their bank. Because what is it that motivates people and criminals? Money. So the threats are typically caused through spear phishing, still the number one threat. People will get tricked into putting their password in. We need to move towards multi-factor authentication much more. But then the end goal is now typically steal data and hit with ransomware. Those have a very high chance of success.
No, totally. How do we build, I suppose, open systems with the rights of people at heart? I watched you talk through something around, when we've got passwords for websites and applications, the organisations hold those passwords, and you were talking about how, if the person had the password, or if the password was, what height are you, all these things that were personal to you, would be better that we had all that information to hand,
Yeah. So I think GDPR has really forced that issue that the citizen should have some rights to be able to understand what's stored on them and how that is being used. And obviously the whole business model of Facebook and Google and these companies is driven by understanding you. And as AI and machine learning becomes so pervasive, they understand you better. I don't know why the governments have censuses anymore. You just ask Facebook. So it's a bit worrying that this vast machine that we're creating is really understanding us and knows us to the second, exactly where we go, what we're buying, and so on. So we really need to start to be understanding that dynamic and to push the data back to the citizen, to at least for them to have control.
Yep.
The contract should be, I'll opt in and I'll tell you what I want to use, rather than they just harvest everything that they can. Many people think of this amazing world with these software agents knowing everything and getting you up in the morning and say, "Hello, Bill, how are you? Would you like me to put the toaster on for you?" That freaks me out. I don't like that. That becomes a Big Brother 1984 world. Intelligent toasters, I give demos with I call it a chocolate teapot, but it's a Wi-Fi enabled kettle. It connects to the internet. I can't think of anything more stupid than a kettle that connects to the internet. An internet-enabled microwave oven. And that is such a scary world that you're starting to build in spying networks in your home that could be easily taken over by anyone. Ring doorbells, fantastic, but do you know that the police could watch the videos to see who was in the street? My home city, Edinburgh, has invested in a CCTV system. Do they use face recognition? Who knows? Because they haven't engaged with the citizens of Edinburgh to say that that's the case. So to me, a Big Brother world is one that actually is watching you all the time. And it doesn't matter who it is, but they're recognizing your face, they're knowing where you're going, they're linking data together. There was talk at football matches that they would have these cameras that would spot known criminals in the crowd or aggressive behaviour. So you know that a machine can actually monitor your face. If you become aggressive...
That's terrible,
So that is a Big Brother world. So I think the future is going to go two ways. One is that we will have this massive spying network where nothing is kept secret. Or it could go into this wonderful la-la land of Alexa. And I must admit, I'm more for the first one. I think we really need to think about how we're using data. And the power of the machine is quite worrying overall. So I suppose it's really how we can start to build the citizen back into that model. We build too many systems, say in healthcare, around clinicians and GPs and so on, and then we revolve like little planets around this solar system. I think if we started to look much more at holistic sort of approaches, we start with the citizen and then others revolve around it. That's a much better approach. And our whole lab here, our Block Pass Identity Lab, is really looking at how we can make sure the citizen has their rights protected for privacy, and then how they can have different personas, and how the government can't link all your identities together into one, so that the taxman can see your health data and your GP can see your tax and so on.
Yeah, that doesn't sound great. So the next question I've got here for you then is, what advice would you give to someone who kind of wants to get into computer security, kind of cyber cryptography?
Well, to me, I think learn the fundamental areas. So if you really want to get into it, then it doesn't do any good to maybe just learn some of the generalized areas. To know what an acronym means really isn't that important, and we use too many acronyms. I think networking is the core one that I learn how TCP works, learn how an IP address works, learn how data gets from one place to the next. That's the internet. That's this amazing machine, the most amazing machine we've ever built, by the way, in humankind. This internet machine, that's what we created. So learn networking in there. Learn the basics of encryption. So it doesn't have to be super duper learning all the math and so on. Just learn basics of using encryption keys and public key encryption and hashing. It's the really interesting. I don't know why we don't teach that at school. We just switch too many kids off at school into computer science and so on. Why not teach them some ciphers and some cracking of, well, I know we teach Caesar ciphers and Mary Queen of Scots, but learn them about Bitcoin, because fundamentally for them, that's going to be a big issue for the future, is whether we move towards cryptocurrencies and tokens and so on. So why don't you get them to debate those topics rather than switching them off with not so interesting computer science lectures about for loops and so on. And then the other area is to program. Sorry for bringing it up, but just like we developed through Excel, spreadsheets and so on, that was the fundamental thing in business. Now we need to code with Python and so on. So I recommend to everybody, they don't have to be software engineers. Python, I use Golang and Rust and JavaScript. In fact, I don't care what language it is. I just find something. But I think learning to code is a really great thing these days. And the barriers to it are almost zero now. So networking, basics of encryption and doing a bit of coding, it would be my first steps. And if you end up with liking any of those, then the career option is there for you.
Yeah, I can definitely tell you, being in IT recruitment, it's crazy just now in terms of the demand for developers, coders, software engineers in the market. The next question I've got here for you, Bill, is holistically, how do we secure better systems? What are the current faults, and what do you think some of the fixes are?
Yeah, the problem is that we don't define ownership of data. So if I give you my data, I've lost it. It's your data now, but it's still really mine. If it's my blood pressure data, you've not really, because of the simplistic data methods that we use, I've lost it. I have no control over it. You have no control of it. You merge it and so on. It's gone. So we need better understanding of how we control the access to data. But basically with cybersecurity, we started off with blacklisting. So blacklisting was like how a firewall works. Everything's allowed, but here are the sites that you're not allowed to go to, and here are the web pages that are blacklisted and so on. That doesn't work because it doesn't scale anymore. So we're moving towards whitelisting. So whitelisting is that you're not allowed to do anything unless it's these things. And if I want to enable something, you've got to ask me, and I'll give you the rights for that. But then I whitelist. If something goes wrong, I'll get rid of that on the whitelist. But the end game must be what's called zero trust. I don't trust anything. I don't trust any data, any application, any service, any person, any role. And then I only have to escalate enough to be able for you to do your job. So I give you enough rights to be able to do this part. If you want to move up to level 2 to now do something else, you now have to get the rights to be able to do that and prove your identity in different ways and so on. So we need to really understand how we can build these zero trust systems, but still don't put too many rocks in the path of users.
Oh, completely. I think it's good that sometimes it is a bit annoying if you're logging into something and it says we've sent you a text, or it says can you go on the Authenticator app and type that code in kind of thing. But we kind of complain about these things, but it is keeping our safe, our data safe, our money safe. But I understand if you put too many in the path, it will get a bit frustrating.
But the thing is that's good, because if I'm buying a car, then I don't mind you putting authentication in place, because I know that that I have trustworthiness for it. So I think we just need to understand, and we're getting there. Yeah. And it's lucky that the banks are coping with this, but obviously it can't be sustained for that long.
Okay, Bill, the next question I have for you here is 10 years. Where are we in terms of computer security, cryptography, financial banking system?
Yeah, well, if we had a prediction system, then we'd all be millionaires and actually understand exactly where things are going, and we'd have amazing spin-out companies and startups that would just fly. So I think that skill of knowing where things are going is a really important one. An obvious one is obviously the move to the public clouds. So like it or not, all of our systems are now mainly getting architected in the public cloud. So hopefully there'll be a rise in proper cloud architects. I'd love to see countries like Scotland and the UK defining data architectures. So if you look at Estonia and in Finland, there is a data architecture for public services, and the citizen is a core part of that. We saw with the pandemic, the usage of, and I kind of worry in the UK that really we don't have a roadmap, we don't have visionaries, we don't have architects defining this is how the data is going to be used. We have a single sign-on, for example. How's that used? If I have a single sign-on for all the NHS services, does it make sure that the data doesn't carry over into HMRC and so on? So I'd really hope that we start to be thinking about our data architecture, but we really need to start to move away from that old legacy 20th century world with forms and so on. So I think that move and the understanding how we can put e-governance services, how we can make it all electronic, to follow small countries like Estonia and Finland who have very high levels of trust in their data infrastructure. I think we're a million miles off. The other big area is to move away from centralized services that we see on the internet. The internet we built is very much centralized on servers, services. They use this horrible DNS URL system. We need to move away from that towards distributed systems that have no chance of failing. Centralized services, even Facebook was taken out for nearly a day because they had a centralized service. So I think the internet is now so important in our lives, and the connection to the internet is almost like as fundamental as electricity and heating and so on. Everyone in the world hopefully should have the rights to have that access and not for there to be any outages.
Yeah, it's so interesting. The internet's this vast thing, as you say. There's all these different areas to it. I think you said earlier on, being built on sand. This thing has been built. Now we're kind of going back and saying, right, how do we make this better, or how do you kind of move to the next version of it? No, very interesting. Well, that concludes part 2 of the podcast. Still going well, enjoying it? We'll move on to part 3 then, Bill, and it's more kind of personal questions for you. And the first one that I have here, fairly straightforward one. What drives you?
It drives me. I think learning drives me, and innovation. So I like to learn, keep learning new areas, and to force myself to learn these things, even if they're quite complex. I will keep going. It's like cipher challenges. I get a cipher challenge and I won't let it go. I know I can solve it, and I'll just keep at it. Yeah. So I think that's the one thing that maybe differentiates some people when they're learning or in development. They will give up eventually, quite rightly.
Oh, completely. Do you think that the more wins you get, or the more times that you overcome a problem throughout your career, I'm sure there's been many problems you've been faced with that you've overcome, does that then make you almost focused? If you get a problem you can't fix, you're almost kind of drawn into it. You need to do this. Were you like that from a teenager, or did that develop as you kind of got more and more problems solved, that you kind of become more, I suppose, addicted to make sure you're getting that done?
Yeah, I don't really like to fail in things, and if I fail, then I'll make sure that the next time I succeed. So I've always got this nightmare of failing a test or an exam or not being prepared. So I think it's that fear of not being prepared, not being ready. I suppose it's like your nightmare where you're in the playground and someone points at you and say you've got your PJs on.
It totally is. Next question I've got here for you then is favourite book.
Favourite book? Yeah, it's all sci-fi. I'm sorry.
I'm sci-fi as well. I'm all for that.
Yeah, well, George Orwell was my hero, and the way he wrote, and his books really are as relevant now. He understood politics, and he told the story. I think that's wonderful. He was obviously talking about a time that we can really reflect now, and some of the conditions. And in 1984, I think that's as valid now as it was then. He looks at the screen and it talks back to him. If you think that's smart TVs, we now have screens and Alexas and so on that can actually do that kind of thing. Space Oddity, the film, obviously predicted the AI world, and a world where AI would become focused on missions. And when you think about it with a smart car, then you have the dilemma in a smart car, is that a smart car can decide whether it's going to run over something in front of it and possibly kill it, or whether it drives off a cliff and kills the person in the car. And in space, in 2001, that dilemma was there, that HAL thought that the crew were going against the mission. The mission was the goal and the most important thing, so it didn't matter that it was going to kill off the crew. And it's such a classic.
Justifies breaking one of the laws. It's like, there's iRobot as well.
iRobot too.
Different laws they've got there.
Yeah, I thought the remake, or the recent one, just wasn't a patch on the original book. Isaac Asimov was probably one of my greatest heroes for writers. If anybody hasn't read his non-fiction stuff than really do it.
Good, yeah.
He wrote about science. It's like Bill Bryson isn't a scientist, but my goodness, does he know how to write about physics and biology? And I think the art of writing has kind of gone to some extent, and it's people like Isaac Asimov who could take a really complex topic like physics and could explain it. So probably I read his work a great deal, but I'd say George Orwell was my favourite.
Awesome. Next one I've got for you here then is favourite tech. I know there's so much to pick from, but what would you say?
Oh, there's only one thing, and I've got it here with me, and I've probably got another few of them around. My DAB radio is wonderful. I love radio. I've even got a shower radio. I like radio so much, and I listen to it. Could be music or it could be just talking, and so I mean that is definitely my number one piece of tech. Along with that, my trusty MacBook, my 2015 classic MacBook has been my instrument of choice for presentations when I've done penetration tests and a lot of engagement things. I take along my MacBook. It's just solid. It's almost like it's there with you all the time, and it has all my data and so on. And the way that integrates with my iPhone and my iPad gives me as a teacher a perfect environment. So I have my iPad, I have my pencil, and I have the Keynote. And at presentations, I can walk away from the lectern and walk away from the PowerPoint, and I carry my iPad, and then I can draw on the slides. So it's just like being in a room with a chalk. So I think just that tech together, I think it makes it more engaging. And with a laptop and you're stuck at a lectern, then it's almost like you're giving a speech, where it should be much more of a kind of discussion and kind of chat. So those would be my favourite ones. And obviously Visual Studio for my coding, I couldn't do without.
Awesome. Right. So the next question for you then is, what is the most important thing you've learned in your life?
Right. Okay. That's a really difficult one. So I'm going to quote Roger Waters here from Pink Floyd. So you might find it's a bit of a tangent, but if you look at his lyrics, a lot of them are around waiting for his life to begin. So he says it many times, and when you think about it, that's like us. So I remember doing a PhD because I want to set myself up. So when my life begins, then I'll have a PhD or I'll be a professor and so on. And then I think you realise eventually that your life has started. And it started a long time ago, and you're living your life now.
Yep.
So to me, the best thing I learned was that I realised I was in the place that I loved. And I almost remember thinking that I really love this city, and I love the people and the environment and everything is there. That's a really great thing to learn in your life, because you know that you're happy. You don't have to go to London to do everything. I realised I was with the people that I loved, my wife and family and so on. That's a big thing in your life. You eventually realise those are the people that I want to be with. And then finally, you realise you're doing what you want to do. So it's almost like it happened, and I became a teacher, and then I became a professor, and then you just turn around one day and you say, this is great. So if you can get those three things in place, then you feel comfortable in yourself. You're not looking for something, and I think it's that searching for those three things.
Totally. Contentment, joy, happiness. You've kind of, there's a certain peace to it all.
Yeah.
Once you've kind of found it, actually you've got it.
Yeah. And we won't all find the three. So we'll find the one where you want to be is a good thing, who you want to be with, and then what you do. And if you find that that's not quite there, then you're still waiting for your life to begin. So when I found that out, then I felt much more comfortable, and I could help people to make sure that they, at least I supported a little bit in their journey to be where they wanted to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, completely. It's definitely something that all aspire to. I hope to find it. The last one I've got here for you, Bill, is if you could have dinner with any three people, dead or alive, who would it be and why?
Okay, that's a difficult one because there'd be lots of people. So I'll try and pick different types of people, and I'd appreciate that I may fall into the usual trap of picking the most obvious people. But I suppose the first one, if you can let me pick a group, because I've read all of their patents, their papers, their whole history, and I believe that they have built the future. And that would be Adi Shamir, Ralph Merkel, and Ron Rivest. So Adi Shamir is the S in RSA, Rivest, Shamir, and Edelman. And Shamir just didn't do that, but he went on to create some amazing cryptographic, a real inspiration all the time. And his papers have really opened up new areas that are just being exploited. Ralph Merkel, in about 3 pages, created this thing that became blockchain. And real genius. He got papers rejected because he didn't put enough references in and so on. I love that wacky genius type. So Ralph Merkel would be the other one, and the final one would be Ron Rivest. For that one dinner spot, Ron Rivest, amazing, continued to work after RSA, invented it, and then carried it through with lots of other papers. So those would be for that one spot, the crypto people, along with Satoshi Nakamoto, if you can invite him, and then I can get his private key, and then we could release all that cryptocurrency. The whole Satoshi Nakamoto thing would be really fun to talk about, and why he did it, and what happened, and so on. But that's going to be difficult. Second one, fairly easy. Nelson Mandela, of course, because he turned the other cheek, and I think that ability is quite amazing in people. But I think his viewpoint on education was fundamental. He said once that education is the most powerful weapon we can use to change the world. And then the last one would be Scott, James Clerk Maxwell, who has a statue in Edinburgh. Real genius. He really changed the world with his viewpoint. And I did my PhD related to the work that he did. So he would be my other one, and I'd just love to talk to him about that one paper and how he did it. I love the whole process of how people write really high impact papers and their thinking behind it. So to talk to him would be amazing.
Yeah, I suppose if you could have dinner with them, maybe a glass of wine, and break it down and say, well, why did you think that? And why did you do this? And what made you get to that? And they would go, well, let me tell you, the story behind it. I'm sure there'd be lots of good kind of anecdotes and things that you'd want to pull out of there. Yeah.
Well, I think in those days people thought they did the thinking process, and I think our lives are so busy now that we never get time to sit down and think. I'm sure James Clerk Maxwell, a lot of people probably thought he's doing nothing. All he does all day is just sit and think and sleep and doze and things like that. But I bet you what he was doing was formulating in his head all these different theories and so on. And I think if we could do one thing in our lives is maybe to have more thinking time, a bit more downtime, and really think about what it is that we do.
No, fantastic. Well, Professor Bill Buchanan, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on Talking with Tech Leaders. Thanks so much for coming on.
Okay, thank you.
Well, thanks for joining us, Professor Bill Buchanan, OBE, on Talking with Tech Leaders. It's been a pleasure having you. And as always, if you're looking to build tech teams in your organisation, or if you're looking for a new role, please feel free to reach out to one of the guys or girls at BIT. We'd be more than happy to help. Thank you.